My name's Ned Plummer, and I started knife making at probably around 10 or 11 years of age when I jammed a chisel into my hand, and I was making a wooden sheath for a piece of galvanized steel I found in the street, and I had some orange boondoggle that would be the handle, and I still wear the scar. But it didn't dissuade me from staying with it. So over the years, I kind of perfected the talent, and now it's I can't say it's a profitable hobby because I think probably lose money on every one I make. But it's a fun hobby, and I do it because I like to do it. As a youngster, I guess my parents were a little bit upset when they found out that I had bought a BB gun from a friend of mine that we were visiting one Thanksgiving, and I paid him 50 cents for it. And as a matter of fact, I still have it, and I still use it. I menace the squirrels around here quite a bit, but I very interested in shooting. I attended Colorado College for a couple of years, and I dropped out between my sophomore and junior years and entered the Army Reserves. And while there at Fort Knox, I established a record with the M1 Garand that, to my knowledge, has never been broken. And that was one of my greatest achievements. And another one was becoming an Eagle Scout, and that's something that in high school I had applied to Colorado College and was turned down, and the headmaster said he'd never really sat down and talked to me, and so we got down to talking, and he asked me if I belonged to any organization. I said, yes, I'm an Eagle Scout. He said, wow. And so about 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Colorado College. I was accepted. That was pretty good. And but I attended that, and I dropped out between my sophomore and junior year, and went back my junior year and decided that it really wasn't for me. I got a job at the DeVilbiss Corporation here in Toledo, and after being there for about a year or so, I decided to go out to one of the gun clubs and learn how to shoot clay targets. And so I happened to be shooting with a gentleman by the name of Jack Lickendorf, who owned Lickendorf's House of Guns. And I shot with him on a number of occasions, and then one day I was driving by his store and I stopped in and said, Jack, I think I need a little bit of income to satisfy my new habit. And he said, well, I'll put you on part-time. So he put me on part-time, and after a couple of months, he said, I want you to go over to the clothes rack and pick out a shooting jacket and a shooting vest in your size. And he said, I'll send them out, and I'll have Lickendorf's House of Guns put on the back and your name on the front. And he said, then go over to the gun rack and pick out an 870 TB, which is a trap gun, and a Browning Superpose skeet gun. And he said, your weekend job will be to, on Sundays, go to the various clubs around, and I will give you 4 boxes of ammunition every week. Just bring back the empties. And if anybody comes in during the week and wants to try a used gun that we've got in the store, then we'll find out how close he lives to one of the clubs. And he said, that's the club you'll go to, and he'll look you up and you can let him shoot the gun, And I said, well, I couldn't beat that. He said, but you have to pay for your own targets, which at that time was $1 a round. So, I did that for a number of years, and they hired a gentleman, a young kid by the name of Mike Harris, and he was very into fly fishing, and so he got me into fly fishing. And one day up on the Pier Marquette, I think I lost $11 worth of flies, and I said, something's wrong here, and I think I better learn how to tie my own flies. Well, I did, and at one point I was tying for 7 stores. One of the stores was Trilby Sport Shop, and so one day the proprietor, Don Turner, called me and said, he said, would you mind working on a Wednesday night so I could have dinner with my wife? And I said, no, I can do that. Well, Wednesday night turned into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and sometimes Saturday. And he had founded the store for his son, and who died in the store at the age of 29 from a cerebral hemorrhage. And he had been working at engineer for Jeep, and then when his son died, he didn't know what to do. He had a store full of merchandise, and Jeep said, go take 6 months, decide what you want to do, and then let us know. So he went back to the store and found out, hey, this isn't too bad at all. So that's when shortly thereafter I met him, and then I started working part-time. And then one day he said, we're talking about something, and he said, you know, Phil would have said the same thing. And I just let it go, and a couple weeks later I was doing something. He said, Phil would have did it the same way. And I got the feeling that I was being adopted subconsciously. And so it turned out later on, he said, I'm going to be retiring in a couple of years. I want you to have the store. I said, I don't have money. He said, well, you can pay me out of profits. And it just turned out that his bookkeeper lived 4 houses down. And so Dick went walking by, and I said, hey, come on up here, I got a bear with your name on it. And so we got to talking, and I said, Don offered me the store. Is it possible? Yep. So I quit the illness. And I started a new business, and that was already going, and I was there for 27 years, 28, somewhere around in there, and retiring in December of 71. 71, I guess it was 71. And no, 91. 91. No. Here I go, 2001, yeah. Yeah, I'm getting Alzheimer's. That's what 81 years does to you. But it was a good time, and I had an opportunity to go on some very memorable hunts and meet a lot of nice people, and I never gave up my love to shoot. And matter of fact, we're going shooting tomorrow, and I shot yesterday. So that's pretty much my little life story. And I started making knives in the early 70s, and about 75 or 76, I met another knife maker, one of my customers, and he said, if you want to really get into it, you got to have a belt grinder. This is a belt grinder. And so I looked them up, and they were only about $1,000. So I said, he said, well, we'll build one. And so that back pulley came off an old conveyor belt, and a lot of this other stuff was, I had a couple pillow blocks around, and I had a motor, and I had also had a motor base, and everything back there he cut and welded, and so we got a homemade homemade unit. And I had my disc sander, and the buffer behind me used to be a two-wheel grinder, but it fell on the floor and broke the grinding wheels before, while I was still at my parents' house, and so I took those off and put buffers in its place, and so that's how we cobbled up a knife making shop. But it's a fun hobby, but it's not cheap. Steel isn't cheap, and those belts that are hanging there are between $8 and $10 a piece, and they wear out pretty quick. But if I break even, that's good enough for me, and I wind up giving away just about as many as I sell. But it's been a rewarding hobby, and I don't like to be pushed. If you want to order a knife, I had a gentleman say, here's a picture of a knife. I want the blade to look like this, and I want the handle to look like that. And that was back in early 80s. He's still waiting for it. And I lost the note, so and he moved to Colorado, so I like to make a knife for myself, and if you like it and want to buy it, that's fine with me. But for somebody to give me a pattern and do that, I said, no, I can't even make two knives that look alike, let alone make one that looks like a pattern. So a lot of times I'll just pick up a piece of steel and walk up to the grinder and start grinding and see what comes out. Grind away everything that doesn't look like a knife. Then there's got to be a knife. So, it's a hobby that I'm starting to wind down a little bit now. And sometimes during the year I don't like to grind. This basement gets pretty hot, and so I find something better to do. But when it starts getting cool and I come down here, then we play with our tools and have a little bit of fun. A lot of I've used my knife on caribou and deer and antelope, but I always manage to say, gosh, how did they do it out west? Or do you have a different way of doing it than we do back here? Show me how you do it. And again, somebody does it for me. So, but they quite often are using one of my knives. And I've skinned out deer and antelope and whatnot, and in most cases, in the 80s, I was always using one of my knives, and quite frequently the guide wound up with one of them too, and like one of my tips was to give him one of my knives. And I remember I was in Wyoming at a taxidermist shop, and the taxidermist looked at me and he said, hey, whose knife is that? And he's pointing the knife on my hip, and I said, well, that's my knife. He said, who made it? I said, I did, that's why it's my knife. And he said, oh, wow. So he was kind of impressed with it, and So, but it was, we didn't go on an awful lot of hunts because some of them got a little expensive. Well, when I shot my doll sheep, that hunt in 2003 cost me $2,004 from the time I left Toledo till the time I hung it on the wall. And today it's closer to 12. And so back then I thought, boy, this is a ton of money, but looking back at it, the time to go sheep hunting is when you can afford it physically, not financially. Because the day will come when you can afford it financially and you're sitting on your chair with a crutch beside you or a walker with all sorts of money, a big fat checkbook, but you can't go. So you've got to go when your body can take it. The banks are full of money. And so beg, borrow, steal it, and go. Go when you can, enjoy it, and it'll be something you'll never forget, which I did. And you can see the doll, that it was a nice ram. And that was, we were up in the Mackenzie Mountains in the Northwest Territories, and we got in, we flew in on a bush plane, and my guide, the year before, had taken his own horse up there, and 10 miles from the barge, he shot it because it quit. It couldn't go any further. To get the horses to our camp, they had to drive them 150 miles overland. And then the hunters showed up, and he hunted his horse virtually every day, and the poor horse couldn't take it. And on the way home, it just didn't make it, and he didn't want it to suffer to the wolves, so he terminated it. But up there, and the outfitter, the last year, or 2 years after we had been up there, he came stateside and stayed with us for a day or two, and he left camp on the 2nd of October and walked into his house on Christmas Eve in Valley View, Alberta. And they had gotten started, they had to go 150 miles from their base camp to the Mackenzie River. And when they got there, the ice had already started and the barge would not come up and pick them up. So they had to stay there for a few days. Then they went north until it was frozen enough to drive the horses across the river and then down the other side. And when they got down the other side, they were probably 300 yards away from where they started, but on the other side of the river, which is where the plane was. And during that time, choppers had to bring feed in, not only for the animals, but for them too. And it took them several weeks to get this done. And then when they got to the other side, they had to bring a horse up to the airplane, knock it down, hog tie it, and load it into the plane, fly it down to Hay River, where the truck was. That was only 1,000 miles. And they had to do that with 16 animals. And they ultimately, I said, by the time it all came to end, he walked into the house with all the money that he had earned with the hunts gone. But rough life up there. But it was an experience that I'll never forget, and I can't I can't tell you how rewarding it was too. I mean, just to be with these people up there and to hunt in an area where no white man has ever been. The area that our outfitter had assigned to him had never been hunted, and he had something like 500 square miles that was his territory. And prior to that, nobody had been allowed in there, but we were glassing an area one time, and I said, you told me that nobody's ever been up here. And he said, yeah. I said, yes, they have. He said, what do you mean? Let's look over there. And there was a tree about this big around, and in the corner were some logs like this. And I said, they didn't fall that way. They were put that way. And somebody had a little shelter here many years ago, and this tree was about this big around. I don't know how many years old it was, but it was in the middle of the living room. And on a little branch was a baby porcupine. And it's the cutest little thing you ever saw. You just don't want to pet them. But then we saw the mother about 150 yards away. So, but that was people had been up there, indigenous people probably following some herds through, and stopped and stayed for a little while. The logs were only about this big around, so it was a very minimal shelter, but it's still they were put together by humans. But that was on all these hunts. It was there's always something that you learn that you'll never forget. But before I retired, this fellow that worked for me, Greg Williams, and I sat down and we tried to figure out how many knives I had made. And before I retired, I had accounted for over 1,000. So I'm in my second 1,000 somewhere, I don't know. Last year, I sold 43. And this year, I had sold my 16th one. I only made them when I feel like it. And I don't make the patterns. The blades I've got over here are the only ones right now that have been heat treated. So they're all ready to go when I decide what kind of a handle I want to put on them and what type of sheath I want to make with it, because I've got 3 different types of leather, and I've got one knife that I started last week, and I've got a couple of pictures of it. One showing the parts that are going to be assembled into the knife, and then one when all the parts are put together and it's sitting in my vise over here, all glued up. And now I'm starting to work on the sheath, and I got kind of a different idea for that. So maybe somebody won't like it, but who cares? I do. It's been a good life. I've enjoyed it, and I suppose I could talk on for quite a while about some of the experiences I've had, but it's been a good life.